Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Allison Wilkie. I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Strategic Campaigns at the Coalition for the Homeless. We're excited to have you here tonight for our I'm Homeless and I Vote virtual voter training. This event's co-sponsored by the Coalition for the Homeless, Vocal New York, Neighbors Together, Community Service Society, Corporation for Supportive Housing, and the Legal Aid Society. And a special shout out to the Coalition for the Homeless's Client Advisory Group, who is watching together this evening. In this training tonight, we're going to discuss why the primary election on June 24th is important and what the next mayor needs to do to end mass homelessness. We're also going to cover the nuts and bolts of how to register or check your registration, voting options, and voting rights for people who are living in shelter or sleeping on the street. And finally, we're going to review how ranked choice voting works. So during this presentation, if you have any access needs or if you need assistance enabling closed captions or any other features, you can put your question in the chat and it will go exclusively to our moderators who can assist you. And if you have any questions about the information we're presenting tonight, you can also put your questions in the chat. We're going to save a few minutes at the end to answer those questions, so we won't answer immediately, but we will have time at the end for any questions that go into the chat. And if we run out of time, then we'll follow up with you individually. So I'd just like to note that this training is nonpartisan. That means that we're not going to discuss any candidates or their platforms, but we will share how you can learn more about the candidates and who's going to appear on your ballot on June 14th. So first, why is it important to vote? Well, voting is one of the easiest ways to have an impact on your future and the future of New York City. So every day, elected officials are making decisions that impact housing, homelessness, benefits, jobs, healthcare, and other really important things in our lives. Primary elections, like the one coming up on June 24th, determine which candidates will appear on the general election ballot in November. In primary elections, where our voters often have the greatest choice because there are more candidates who want to be the party's nominee for the general election that happens in November. And in places like New York City, where voters tend to be heavily of one party, in our case, the Democratic Party, often the primary election can be more determinative of who is actually going to be elected in November. But despite the importance of primary elections, turnout is really low in primary elections in New York City. In the last primary election, only 15% of voters cast a ballot. And primary election voters tend to be homeowners and they tend to be older. And because those people vote reliably, they end up having the most say in our elections. And candidates can often tailor their policies and their messages to those people because they know those are the people who are going to vote. So that's why it's important for people who have experienced homelessness to vote, so that our experiences are taken seriously by candidates and that we can elect people who are actually serious about addressing homelessness. So one important thing to know, in New York, in the primary elections, you are registered with. So if you're registered as a Democrat, you can only vote for the Democrat candidates in the primary. If you're registered as a And if you're not registered with a party, you can't vote in the primary election. So knowing your party registration is really important for primary elections. And later on, we're going to discuss how you can check your party registration or change your party registration. So as I said, the primary election is on June 24th, and there's many offices that are up for election. There's 4 citywide offices on the ballot: the mayor, the comptroller, the public advocate, and there's also borough presidents for each of the 5 boroughs. Plus, you'll be voting for the council member for your district. You can find out who's going to be on your ballot at nycvotes.org. If you go to that website and you select what's on the ballot, you'll be able to see that information. I did check this morning and they haven't quite updated their voter guide, but that should be updated soon and you can see exactly who you will be voting for. So all of these offices that are on the ballot play a major role in city policy and how the city spends taxpayer dollars and how we're addressing the different problems in our city. The next mayor and the other elected offices that are up for election must make homelessness a priority. New York City's homelessness crisis has never been worse. Currently, there's about 350,000 New Yorkers who are homeless on any given night. So this staggering number includes thousands of people who are sleeping unsheltered in our public spaces. It also includes over 114,000 people who are sleeping in shelters, but it doesn't stop there. There's over 200,000 people doubled up or tripled up in others' homes. So these figures really show the urgent need for leadership in New York City that understands that housing is the solution to the mass homelessness crisis that we're facing. And this is why we've developed a plan that outlines the actions that the next mayor must take to address the crisis. Let's talk about a few of those priorities. First, the city needs to build at least 12,000 new units of deeply subsidized affordable housing every year for the next 5 years. And importantly, this housing has to be targeted to homeless families and households and those who have extremely low incomes. Too much of the affordable housing that has been built in the last decade has been for higher income people, not the low income households and people that keep this city running. We also need to fulfill the promise of 15,000 new supportive housing units within the next 3 years. Only about half of those units have been built so far. And we need to prioritize homeless households for existing federal resources and ensure that vacant units in public housing are repaired and prioritized for homeless households. We're going to break for,
Allison, I'm sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
There's an issue with the graphic. I'm sorry. There's like a black box showing up, so folks are having trouble seeing the slide.
Great. People are just flagging this for me now.
Okay.
Thanks for letting me know. So just going on from there, we need to prioritize homeless households for our existing federal resources and ensure that the units in public housing are repaired and prioritized for homeless households. And part of the solution to our homelessness crisis is also fixing and expanding existing programs. So we know that rental assistance vouchers like CityFEP successfully help people leave shelter, but a law passed to expand CityFEPs to more households hasn't been implemented by the current administration. And there's also a lot of administrative problems and hurdles and delays that really cause issues for people who are trying to get access to CityFEPs or people who are trying to get access to supportive housing. These issues need to be fixed so that these existing programs that we have get people out of shelter faster. And finally, the next mayor must help people who are facing eviction stay in their homes by increasing funding for the Right to Counsel program to ensure that everyone eligible has access to a lawyer during eviction proceedings. The next mayor also needs to address the crisis on our streets and subways by increasing community mental health care, low barrier shelters, and housing. So first, the city has to implement a true Housing First program. So Housing First prioritizes connecting people with housing that meets their needs and then ensuring that people have access to services like health and mental health care. New safe haven and stabilization shelter beds for people who are sleeping unsheltered because their needs have not been met in the traditional shelter system. We also need to expand funding for intensive mobile treatment teams. These teams provide mental health at addressing their mental health needs directly with an assigned team of specialists. And then finally, we have to remove NYPD and sanitation from outreach efforts and end cruel and harmful policies that try and sweep homeless people from sight or criminalize them instead of actually meeting their needs, including the need for more public bathrooms. So that was a brief outline of our plan to end mass homelessness. You could read the full plan at the link that's on the page here. We've also put up a QR code. You can scan it with your phone right now. If you scan that or go to that link, you'll see a link to our full platform for what the next mayor needs to do to address mass homelessness. You can also send a message to the next mayor that homeless needs to be a day one priority by endorsing our platform. This tells our next mayor that this is a priority for New Yorkers, and that we need to help people who are homeless secure housing that they can afford. In other words, our whole plan basically boils down to the fact that housing is the solution to homelessness. There's also a link on the screen that where you can go to find more about the candidates who are running for mayor. And that's at thenyhc.org/mayoral-candidates. So we're going to do a quick poll for folks who are watching. So the question we have is, what do you think the next mayor's top priority should be? And possible answers we have here are connecting people sleeping on streets and subways to permanent housing and community mental health care. B is building more affordable housing for people living in shelter. C is fixing problems with city FEPS vouchers to make the process easier. And D is building more supportive housing for people with mental illness, addiction, and chronic illness. Now, I know we need all of these things, but I'd like to hear from you. What do you think the mayor's next priorities should be? So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. It should pop up on your screens, and we can give people a minute to vote on what they think the mayor's next priority should be. Give it another minute for folks to answer. All right. Oh, we still got some votes rolling in. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the connecting people sleeping on our streets and subways to permanent housing and community mental health care. But building more affordable housing for people living in shelters coming in at a close second. So as I said, all of these things are really important for the next mayor. And you can be a part of helping push the next mayor and tell them that it's important by endorsing our platform on the link that was on the previous page. So let's move on to the next part of our presentation about how to vote. So hopefully at this point you're fired up to vote. You're fired up to have leadership in this city that is going to address mass homelessness. So let's talk about all the details you need in order to vote. So first, in order to vote, you need to be registered to vote. So you can register to vote, or you can change your registration address or other details online at vote.nyc. So if you're not sure what address you're registered at, or if you're not sure where your voting site is, you can look it up at vote.nyc, or you can call 1-866-VOTE-NYC. If you prefer, you can also visit your County Board of Election office in person to do these things. On a later slide, I'll have the addresses of those offices. There's one for each borough. But just remember that you have to be registered at your current address. So if you're registered at another address, when you look it up, you can change your address up to 10 days before the election. So for this year, that's going to be June 14th as your deadline to change your address. And again, in order to vote in the primary election, you have to be registered with a political party. So you can add a political party to your registration, or you can change the party at that same site, vote.nyc. So let's address some common questions that people have. So first, where do you vote if you're living in a shelter? So if you're living in a shelter, use your shelter address to register. Or if you've registered in the past at a different address, you can update your registration with your shelter address. That means you'll be assigned a polling site near the shelter where you're living. Now, if you're unsheltered, if you're sleeping on the streets or subways or in other places, you don't have a fixed address, you also have the right to vote. And this right was secured by a lawsuit brought by the Coalition for the Homeless decades ago. You can use any address where you're sleeping to register. Just put that address into the registration or change your address at vote.nyc, and you would vote at the polling site for that location. So what do you need when you go to vote? Well, the short answer is nothing. So as long as you've registered before the deadline, you don't have to show identification when you show up to vote. You don't need documentation that confirms your address. You only need to show up. When you show up at your polling site, poll workers are going to direct you to the right table because there's multiple tables at polling sites. You give your name and address, and then they'll be asked to sign, you'll be asked to sign next to your name, and then you'll be given a ballot. Again, you don't need any kind of documentation of your address in order to vote. Another frequent question is whether you can vote if you were incarcerated for a felony conviction or if you're on parole. Many people think that if you've been convicted of a felony or incarcerated that you can't vote, and this is not true. If you're incarcerated for a felony conviction, you're not able to vote while you're incarcerated, but once you've been released, you're still eligible to vote, even if you're on parole. The only thing you need to know is that if you were registered before you were sent to prison, you have to register again after your release. But you are eligible to vote. So let's talk about the different ways you can vote, including some new ways. So first, you can go to your poll site on election day, which is June 24th. That polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And again, to find your polling site, you can visit vote.nyc or you can call 1-866-VOTE-NYC. So what if it isn't convenient for you to vote on June 24th? Well, you also have the option to vote early in person. Early in-person voting runs from June 14th to June 22nd. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that the early voting poll site might be different from your regular election day poll site, and the voting hours are different. So you can check out those details at findmypollsite.vote.nyc. You can also vote using a new option, the early mail ballot. So any registered voter can get a ballot sent to you in the mail. You just have to request it, and you can do that at requestballot.vote.nyc, or you can go in person to your county board of elections. So when you request an early mail ballot, the ballot will be mailed to the address you provide, and it'll include a postage paid return envelope. So after you fill out the ballot, you just drop it in the mail. You use that postage paid envelope, so you don't have to pay any postage, and drop it in the mail. Make sure it's postmarked no later than the day of the election. So if you're permanently ill or you're disabled and it's difficult for you to go to a polling site, you have the right to receive an absentee ballot. You can file an application with your county board of elections for an absentee ballot, and you just have to indicate that you have a permanent illness or a physical disability. You can do that online at requestballot.vote.nyc, or you can go in person to your county board of election office. Your request for an absentee ballot must be received by the county board of elections no later than 10 days before the election if you mail the request, or the day before the election if you deliver the request in person to your local board of election office. After you submit an absentee ballot application because of a permanent illness or a disability, you're going to then automatically be mailed an absentee ballot for every election until you cancel that absentee ballot registration. So what if you have difficulty reading or writing? So voters who have any disability that interferes with reading or writing or with the use of printed materials can apply online for a ballot that has accessible features. You can do that at requestballot.vote.nyc/accessibility. Disabilities can also vote in person using an accessible ballot marking device. These are special voting devices. They're available on election day and during early voting if you go in person. And they have features that allow the ballot to be read to you using headphones, and they have different ways to be able to mark a ballot. Poll site workers will help you use that ballot marking device. There are also protections for domestic violence survivors who might have concerns about an abuser showing up at a polling location or being able to see their address. So you can apply to keep your registration confidential, or you can apply to get an alternative polling location. You have to contact your Board of Elections and submit an affidavit. The affidavit doesn't require you to provide any proof or documentation of your need. It is just a signed document. And here on this page, we have the addresses of all of the boards of election. So anything that you want to do in person regarding your registration or requesting an absentee ballot, you can do at these addresses. You just need to go to the county where you're currently living. And I'm going to pause for one moment just in case people want to take down that address or the telephone number for their board of election. All right, so let's do a pop quiz. Here's our quiz question. So what are the 4 different ways you can vote? There's 4 different ways you can vote in New York. So A, early in-person voting, B, early mail ballot, C, absentee ballot, D, in-person voting. I'm going to put that quiz up. It'll pop up on your screen. Just a moment. So you're going to pick 4 options, 4 different ways you can vote. Give it just another minute. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So the correct answers are A, early in-person voting, B, early mail ballot. That's where you get the ballot by mail and you mail it back in. Absentee ballot, which is also a mail ballot and can be used for folks with disabilities, and election day in-person voting. The only thing we don't have in New York is D, ballot drop boxes. All of our voting options are either by mail or in-person voting. Sorry, just pop that up on your screen. Okay. So let's just review some of the important dates and deadlines you need to know. So the deadline to register or to change your registration or change your address or party is June 14th. Early mail ballot request, if you want to request a ballot by mail, that deadline is also June 14th. And if you need to request an accessible ballot, that deadline is also June 14th. So easy to remember, all your deadlines are June 14th. The election day for election day voting in person is June 24th. And early in-person voting starts on June 14th and goes through June 22nd. Just remember again that your early in-person voting site might be different from your regular polling site, and the times that it's open might be different. So look that information up. So now let's talk about ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is relatively new in New York City. We used it for the last mayoral primary election 4 years ago, and it's been used in some special elections, but it isn't used in every election. So you may not be totally familiar with how it works. So I'm going to show a short video that explains how ranked choice voting works.
There's a new way for New Yorkers to have their say in city elections. A way that gives voters more choices and can lead to more diverse winners. It's called ranked choice voting. 74% of New York voters chose to use it in primary and special elections for city offices: mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough president, and city council. You won't see ranked choice voting in general elections or elections for state or national offices. But in ranked choice voting elections, you can now rank up to 5 of your favorite candidates for each office. Here's how ranked choice voting works. On your ballot, you'll see candidates listed in rows and numbered rankings in columns. Pick your first choice and completely fill in the oval next to their name under the first column. Like always, you can just vote for your one favorite candidate and submit your ballot. But you might like several people. If you have a second choice, fill in the oval next to their name under the second column. Do the same thing for your third, fourth, and fifth choices if you have them. A few don'ts. Don't rank the same candidate more than once. It won't help them, and it takes away your chance to rank the others who are running. Don't give the same rank to multiple candidates. It could disqualify your ballot. Don't worry. This is a new process, and you can always ask a poll worker for help, or for a new ballot if you make a mistake. So, how do ballots get counted with ranked choice voting? If one candidate gets more than 50% of everyone's first choice votes, they win the election right away. That's it. If no candidate gets more than 50%, ballots will be counted in rounds. Round by round, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated. So, if your top-rated candidate is eliminated, your vote goes to your next highest choice. This keeps going until only 2 candidates remain. The person with the most votes wins. Ranked choice voting is already popular in many cities around the country because voters find that it helps more voices be heard. Now it's our turn. Get answers to your questions and learn more at nyccfb.info/RCV.
All right, so let's review a little bit about what was in the video. I'm including some of the benefits of ranked choice voting. So sometimes in elections, people don't vote for the candidate who they like the most because they don't think that that person has a chance of winning, and they don't want to throw away their vote. Ranked choice voting solves that problem by allowing voters to rank their candidates. So what happens is when the votes are counted, everyone's first choice is counted. And after the first choice is counted, if no candidate has received more than 50% of the vote, that's where the ranking comes in. So if the candidate you ranked first received the fewest amount of votes, then your second choice then gets counted. And this goes on with the bottom candidates being eliminated until a candidate gets over 50% of the vote. Ranked choice voting is used in other cities. It's also actually how the Best Picture movies are selected for the Oscars, is through ranked choice voting. So it allows people to just rank which candidate, anywhere from 1 to 5 candidates, who you like most, and it gives voters more choice. I think one of the important things about ranked choice voting is that you don't have to rank any candidate that you don't like. You don't have to rank someone that you don't want to be mayor. So if you feel strongly that you don't want a person elected, then don't rank that person. You can rank everyone else, but you don't want to rank the person who you don't want to be elected. You don't have to rank all 5 people. You can rank one person just as In other elections, you can rank 2, 3, 4, or 5. And again, you don't have to rank any particular candidate, especially if you don't want that candidate elected. So let's do a short pop quiz about what we learned about ranked choice voting. So which of the following statements is true? First, you must rank all 5 candidates, or you must rank 5 candidates, pardon. Second, you can rank the same candidate more than once. Or C, you don't have to rank at any candidate who you don't like. So I'm going to pop that quiz up on the screen. So again, which of those following statements is true? Give it another minute. Looks like some folks are still voting. Give it 10 more seconds. Okay, go ahead and end it there and share the results. So the correct answer is that you don't have to rank any candidate who you don't like. Just addressing the other two, you do not have to rank 5 candidates. You can rank 1 candidate, you can rank 3, you can rank all 5, but you don't have to rank all 5. And you cannot rank the same candidate more than once. So if you're going to rank more than 1 candidate, they have to be different candidates. But again, the correct answer here is that you don't have to rank any candidate who you don't like. So let me put some resources here on the screen. So if you want to just look at that voter registration information that we shared and some of those FAQs, you can go to coalitionforthehomeless.org/voting-rights. That addresses a lot of the registration deadlines, the different links you can go to register. There's a link there for your Board of Election locations and to find your voting locations. And again, if you want to endorse our plan, Housing is the Solution, or Plan to End Mass Homelessness, you can go to coalitionforthehomeless.org/take-action. So I'll leave those links up for just 1 second before we go into Q&A. Okay, so it looks like maybe we've had a few questions in the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite some of our folks who are helping moderate to share some of the questions that we've received, and we can try and answer those questions for you.
Yeah. So one question more on the logistics side, I think this was in one of the slides, but maybe you could reiterate, Allison, was what is the deadline to change political party for voting in the primaries?
Yeah, so that deadline is the same as the deadline for changing your address. It's June 14th. So there's 2 dates that you're going to remember. It's going to be June 14th, which is your last day to register, your last day to change your address, the last day to change your party affiliation. And then the other date that you need to remember is June 24th. That's our primary election day.
A second, we sort of couple of questions around a theme. So there was a sort of question around how do we get authentic representation? Comments about, what we need out of the aspects of the platform that you shared. So I think if you could maybe address sort of a set of questions around what can folks on this call and in the communities that they live in and work in do to make sure that the people who are getting elected through this process are actually, representing folks experiencing homelessness, folks who are experiencing eviction, right? The folks who are on this call.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the number one thing first and why we're doing this training is to vote, right? There's, I think, a perception that people who are homeless or people who have experienced homelessness, there's a perception that they don't vote. And that's why candidates don't often speak to their needs or don't speak to their needs enough, right? In order to make sure that our elected officials are really paying attention to our needs, people need to actually participate and get out there and vote. I think the other part is, looking into the candidates and what they're saying about their platforms and how they're going to address homelessness. So part of the reason that we released our plan to end mass homelessness is to get specific about some of the things that we think the next mayor needs to do. And then as a voter, you can look and see. We had that link on a previous screen, and maybe I can share that back if you'll give me one moment, about where you can actually see the candidates' plans, and give me just a second, and what their positions are. There we go. So just put that back up on screen for just a moment. Here's where you can both see our ideas, that we've gathered from all of our work, working with folks who are homeless and advocating about homelessness, both with our plan and then also just to find that information about the plans of the mayoral candidates. That link is at the bottom of the screen. That is the New York Housing Conference, which has collected some information from candidates about what their housing plans are. Another, just to take it further, I think voting is really important, but also, just staying engaged with some of the advocacy that's, happening around homelessness. The groups on this call also do a lot of advocacy. There's different ways that people can engage with our organizations to get involved. And that, includes actually doing direct advocacy with our elected officials and trying to tell them what we need to do to end mass homelessness. That's protests and that is rallies and that is also one-on-one meetings with elected officials, and really just being a voice out there to make sure that the voices of folks that are homeless are being heard. Statistic that I shared earlier that only 15% of voters or registered voters voted at the last primary election. So voter turnout is really low. I think there's a belief that it's not important, but it is really important that we're looking to what candidates are saying and that we're actually showing up to the polls and trying to elect someone who's going to care about homelessness and care about the real crisis around housing and affordability that we are facing in this city. Do we have any other questions?
I possibly have one, right? So when folks, I guess like we reviewed this in a presentation, right? But when people are voting, filling out the ballot, like what are like common, if you can like elaborate a little bit more of like what happens, right? Like if you mess up, right, and you need to, to like make a correction, and what's like the best ways to troubleshoot who's like the best person to ask if you happen to be inside a poll site.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think because especially ranked choice voting is new and it's a little bit confusing and it may not look like a ballot, that we are normally saying, you might mess it up. It's okay if you mess it up. I know the first time I did it, I was confused and I had to sit there for a minute, but that's why there are poll workers at every site, and they've been trained. So you can ask a poll worker to help you. If you've put the wrong thing in, you can ask for a new ballot and they will give you a new ballot. And so just feel free to ask the folks who are working there at the polls. They're there for a reason, in order to help you. And don't feel like if you make a mistake and you get that ranking wrong, that that's the end of it. You know, you can just ask for a new ballot and they will give you a new ballot. If you're not voting in person and you've requested a mail ballot, you can try and make that correction. But if for some reason, you know, something has happened, or then you can still vote in person. So even if you've requested an early mail ballot, you can still vote in person and show up at your poll site either for early voting or on election day to vote.
We got another one, if you're ready, Allison.
Yeah, sure. And also, I think partners on this call can feel free to offer their thoughts too.
So another question is, how can we make sure people are voting in their community, and what's like the best advice to like encourage more folks to participate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one thing, and there was a link to this at the end of the presentation, you know, to our website, but we also have a separate flyer that has our flyers, like that everyone has a right to vote, and it has some of the specific information about voting if you're living in sheltered or living unsheltered, or even if you've recently been released from prison. So those flyers are available. You can get that on our website, and or just drop a message in the chat and we can be in touch about getting some to you. I think just posting those flyers where you're sleeping or staying is important to just getting the word out for people to vote, and just keep reminding people that it's election day coming up. You know, I think we all get busy, but you know, these are important, and I think it's one of the, I think, great things is that, you know, when I first came to New York a long time ago, the only way you could vote was on election day, right? You had to go to your polling site on election day, and there were very few other ways to vote. But we've done some good work in trying to expand the ways you can vote, including voting by mail and including the early in-person voting sites, you know, to make it easier for people to try and fit voting into their schedule. Because I know it can be hard with all of the things that we're dealing with, you know, with you know, on a daily basis. It's hard sometimes when it comes to election day, and suddenly you're trying to fit another thing in your day. But that's where some of these other voting options can come in. You know, you can get that mail ballot, and so you can just fill it out at your leisure and mail that in when you want, or you can try the early in-person voting. So you have more flexibility to try and fit in voting when it works for you. So I think to the extent that we can try and get the word out to people that there are these different voting options, that's really helpful in making voting more accessible for folks who may have a lot of really other important things that they're doing and trying to take care of in their lives, and voting may not be the top of mind.
I have another question, and it's, you know, some people might want to, as they're doing their research and deciding, you know, who they're going to vote for, then we're curious to see, well, who's funding these people, these candidates' campaigns? So like, what's like the best way for someone to find that information out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there has been reporting on some of the funding for different campaigns. And, you know, it's definitely true. There's been reporting that, you know, some of big business in New York, including real estate, is dumping a lot of money in particular candidates. And so, you know, that's something that, you know, if you use the internet, you can Google, you know, who's supporting different candidates, who's contributing to their campaigns. You know, New York City mayor is a big election, and so it, you know, definitely, you know, big business and corporations and real estate who have interests, you know, do dump a lot of money in those elections, and you can see who is getting that. And there has been some reporting too on like which candidates are getting more small dollar donors, right? Having more people, more grassroots efforts supporting people. So all of that is available. I don't have a specific side off the top of my head, but I know there's been a lot of news reporting around that. I don't know, Adolfo, do you have? Yeah.
I will add, like, at least in New York City, cannot opine on state and federal, which are different and less complicated. But New York City has a New York City office in New York City. When they're fundraising, they have to report, who is giving them the contribution, where that person works, and like that data is publicly available. If you go, you Google New York City Campaign Finance Board, and you can see, how much money a candidate has raised, whether they're running for city council, board president, comptroller, mayor, for any party. And you can look for yourself, and you can see the trends of, like, maybe these are folks who, live in the neighborhood, right? Because, there is something that's called public matching dollars, public matching funds, that makes it easier for candidates who are grassroots, who might not be able to bankroll a whole campaign, but they can meet a certain threshold by having X amount of people in their community, in their district, contribute to their campaign. So those are things that you could look into. The website is pretty accessible, and you can make your determinations based on who's funding these campaigns. And the same goes for these, we might be seeing what's called independent expenditures flooding our TVs, our ads, and mailers. And you can see the names of these independent expenditures and who's funding those too. So that's publicly available data that's available for folks to sift through and make their determinations based off whatever you need to make your decisions on.
I've got another question. Can independents vote in the Democratic primary election?
No, so if you're registered as an independent, you can't vote for the candidates. So in the general election, that's different, but in the primary, you can't do that. So you'd have to be registered as a Democrat to vote for the Democrat candidates. Do we have any other questions? Okay, so I think we're good. So thank you to everyone who attended this. Thank you to Emily Goldstein at ANHD and Adolfo Abreu from Vocal New York, and our other partners who've been working on this and who sponsor this: Legal Aid Society, Neighbors Together, Community Service Society, and Corporations for Supportive Housing. Appreciate everyone's attendance. I know we got some follow-up in the chat, and we'll be following up with those people. But hopefully we will see you at the polls. If not on June 24th, then maybe early voting, or maybe you'll be submitting your ballot by mail. Appreciate everyone getting engaged and making sure that the needs and interests of folks who've experienced homelessness are being represented in our elections, and that our candidates hear us loud and clear that we need to end mass homelessness, and that housing is the solution to ending mass homelessness. Thanks, everyone.
Recording stopped.